Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ida and here is my wrap up of the books that I read in May and in June. I've had to combine them this time because I was in South Korea in the end of May and then I was sick in the beginning of June. So I never managed to film a May wrap up. So for that reason, they're combined this time. And in order not to make this video way too long, I'm gonna try and do it very quickly. And I'm just gonna say a few keywords for every book and then say whether I would recommend them or not, all depending on what kind of reading style you have. So I started out May with a reread of one of my favorite books, and that was Funny Story by Emily Henry. I have reread all of her books, I think, so far, except for Great Big Beautiful Life that came out last year, and then this one. This was my first reread. And I think I even loved it more the second time around. For some reason, I can't describe how these two characters are connected in any way that makes sense. But we follow Daphne and Miles. And Daphne and Miles are both dumped by their ex-fiancés because their ex-fiancés, they find each other, like they end up falling in love with each other. So Miles and Daphne are like the leftover partners. Daphne really wants to leave because she realizes that all of her life has just been kind of evolving around her ex, and she doesn't really have any friends or any places that she goes by herself. She doesn't really know the city, and then Miles kind of helps her out with that. And just in true Emily Henry fashion, the dialogue is really witty and smart, and the characters, they feel like actual people, and she is just the queen of romance, and I think especially summer romance. So this is always going to be a recommendation. And if you've read all of her books, reread them. I promise you it's going to be even better. Then I actually had 3 other rereads right after, which is insane. That's not something I normally do. But that was Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare, Clockwork Prince, and Clockwork Princess. I read these, I think, in 2018 or something. I've been watching Hallie's videos here on YouTube, and she's gotten me so hooked on the Shadowhunters universe again. So that's why I wanted to reread these. I actually recorded a reading vlog that I think I'll try to put up. So I'm not going to say too much about the books, also because it's part of a series and it would be insane to try and explain what happens in these 3 books. But they're going to be a recommendation from me. I love the characters in this, and especially if you like a combination of fantasy with historical fiction, then I think you would really like these books. Also, we get really close to the 3 main characters, and Jem will just always have a really soft spot in my heart. I love him, I adore him, and I will say some of these books almost made me cry, so that's always going to mean that I'm going to recommend them. Then I read a book that I hadn't heard about at all, but I saw a lot of people compare Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower to Dodie Smith's I Capture the Castle. But we are just reading the diary of Cassandra, and she lives in a castle. That's basically what the title refers to as well. So she tells us about her life at this old shabby castle with her dad and his girlfriend and her sister and these Americans who move in next door to them. And it's just a really good time. I actually laughed a couple of times, which was not something I expected. It took me a while to get into it, but once I was in it, I really enjoyed it. I just have such a vivid idea of what the castle looks like and the entire atmosphere around it. I think it's described so well, and it's always fun to be in the head of a witty teenage girl. So I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to watch the movie. This is also going to be a recommend. Then I listened to a few audiobooks. One of them was There Is No Ethan by Anna Akbari, and it's about a catfish called Ethan. But spoiler alert, there is no Ethan. It's a catfish. And we follow these different women who have been catfished by him. And the author of this book was one of the women who was catfished. So that made it really interesting. I think it worked so well as an audiobook. I remember it being a little long, but I would highly recommend listening to it. And for obvious reasons, I can't say too much about this, but it's about their meeting with Ethan and how they're trying to seek some kind of justice in all of this. Then I also read The Stranger in the Woods by Michael Finkel, and I don't remember who was the narrator, but it was a really good book. I saw it recommended a lot as an audiobook, so that's why I picked it up. And I would definitely recommend this one too. It's about a guy who kind of just leaves society, and then he lives as kind of a hermit for I think it's 20 years, might even be more, in the middle of the woods, and no one sees him. I think he has one interaction in all of those years, but other than that, he is trying to be self-reliant and then stealing small things from places where he knows that people will have certain items, and then he's just like taking a little bit, but people are of course scared because they feel like someone's breaking into their house, which he is. And it's this interview with the guy, like the stranger in the woods, and what it was like, why he decided to go into the woods. I have now read, I think, 2 books by Michael Finkel, and I really enjoy them. I think they're written in a really interesting and engaging way. So absolutely I recommend again. Then I read a book that's no surprise, I think, to anyone who's on the internet. I read Yesteryear by Carol Claire Burke. This is kind of like the literary, almost horror book of the year, I guess. It's about a tradwife who has a huge social media following, and she is transported back into the time where like people were actually living like the tradwives are today. So like without any technology, and like not in order to portray their life to a bunch of people online. And again, I can't say too much, that would be a spoiler, but this was really eerie and very, very captivating. I read it in no time because I simply had to know what was going to happen. If you like social discussions about social media and the way we portray ourselves online, yes, modernization in general, I highly recommend reading this book. Then I read Fragile Hopes by Lysina Coney, and I will say it was mainly because of the cover, and then because I knew it was about a firefighter. Sue me. But it is about a girl and her neighbor who's a firefighter, and she has custody over her younger brother, and she's really trying to make sure that she could give him and provide everything for him that he needs, but she is struggling. And then it's just about like, yeah, their relationship. I was a little disappointed, unfortunately. I think my favorite thing about it was the cover, but there were just some parts, especially near the end, where like the coincidences were just a little too on the nose, and like the things that happened kind of felt like a soap opera. And I didn't connect that much with the characters either. But if you do want to read like a quick romance book, I recommend it. If you want a romance book that hits a little harder, I would maybe skip this one. Then I read a short story, like a novella by Kara Bestow, and it was When We First Met. It's a story that takes place in New York, and I have this thing with New York in the summer. I just love it. So I really enjoyed this. This was a very quick read, like you can read it in a couple of hours, but it's a quick love story about a girl who really wants to hook up with this guy who lives in her apartment. She keeps like missing her chances and then running into his roommate instead. I recommend this. I do recommend all of the Kara Bestow books that I've read so far. She is really good at writing very likable characters, and I think the humor in the books is really good. And then I just love that her books take place in New York. As I said, like, I love a New York set. Then I read Girl Next Door by Rachel Meredith. The sapphic love story. I forgot a lot of it, I'm not gonna lie, because I read this while I was sick. But I just remember finishing it and being like, I did not root for any of the people in this book. Like, they were so unlikable. Everyone were super flawed to the point where it kind of got on my nerves because they didn't really have any redeeming qualities. And I've seen other people say the same thing. So this I would just skip. It wasn't that enjoyable, unfortunately, and it was really long, like much longer than it needed to be in my opinion. I also read a YA book called Together We Rot by Skylar Arndt. This was like the perfect YA creepy forest cultish autumn book, which is like a genre that kind of describes what I like. I love books that have some kind of cult influence, and also things with like nature and like kind of like a nature horror thing. I really enjoy that. I feel like this would be the perfect book to read in autumn. I think I rated it 4 stars, and I'm not gonna say too much because that would maybe spoil it again, but I would read this one for the vibes for sure. Actually, I think it would work as a winter book too, because it takes place during winter, so it's like really stormy and snowy and cold. The way the setting was described made it so vivid that even though I was in South Korea in like 33 degrees weather, I was feeling cold. Like, that's how well she described the atmosphere in the book. So for that reason alone, almost, I would recommend it. Also just general great story. Then I read maybe the most disappointing book that I've read this year. I read Into the Blue by Emma Brody. I know a lot of people love this book, but I had such a hard time getting through it. I felt like it was way too long for no reason, and I just wasn't invested. We follow these 2 characters who meet when they're young, and they are trained in acting together in like this special way, and then they meet again several years later because they were both cast in the same show. And we don't know what has happened between them earlier, but they haven't been on speaking terms for many years. And we follow them from back then to today. And I don't know, there's just something about books about theater. I guess they're just not for me. I also read Tom Lake by Anne Pratchett something, a couple of years ago. And that was also one of the most boring books I've ever read. I'm so sorry to everyone who loves that book. But for that reason, I also gave this book 2 stars. Like, it was a struggle to get through. Unfortunately, this was a miss for me. If you like Tom Lake, I think you're gonna love this one. If you did not like Tom Lake, like me, I don't think you need to read this one. And then finally, I read a sapphic cowgirl romance book. It was called The Pop Star's Cowgirl by A. Goswami. This is about a superstar who is recording her music video at this farm where we have a female ranger, and she's not pleased with this pop star like dumping into her home and like completely taking over. This cowgirl is a couple of years older. She also has a daughter who's a huge fan of this pop star. Through all the cowboy romance books that I've read so far, I haven't really enjoyed them, but I think what was just missing for me was that it was a sapphic story, because I realized I actually like cowgirl stories when like the girl is a cowgirl. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. If you like sapphic love stories, you like cowboy romances, in this case cowgirl, and open door romances for sure as well, then I would recommend this one. That was all the books for me. I started out June with another audiobook, also one written by Michael Finkel, and that was True Story Murder Memoir Mea Culpa. This is about a guy who uses Michael Finkel's identity as kind of like a cover-up. There is a case going on. His wife and kids are missing, and the police are looking for him because they think he has something to do with their disappearance. And then once they've been found and they're unfortunately all dead, then the police are even more convinced that this guy is behind it. So Michael Finkel actually reaches out to this guy while he's in jail and like talks with him about like his life story and what happened and why he used his identity while he was trying to escape everything that was happening back in the US. Like, I think he went to Mexico or something. So this was another book that was really interesting. I think in general, just the topics that he picks are super interesting. Also a very weird dynamic because he talks to these people who for sure are not good people. This is probably not a spoiler because this happened like years ago, but this guy is convicted of the 3 murders. So I guess also just a weird thing to listen to an audiobook about someone who's done something really horrible and then like getting that story, a journalist too. It's just like a wild ride, but I highly recommend it. I also read a Danish book, and I don't even know how to pronounce this. This is not Danish, by the way. I think it's Latin. Sui Juris by Malou Slot, and Malou is a Danish author that I've met a couple of times, and she is the coolest. This is her first adult book, and it's an autobiography. So it's about her life, like her inspiration for a fantasy series that she's writing, but it's mainly about her life and the things she's had to overcome, how she's done that, and just written in such a beautiful and vivid way that really was very like anxiety inducing at the same time as being something I just couldn't stop reading. It was so beautiful. It had me crying a few times, and I just have so much more respect for Malou after reading this book, which I thought was impossible because I already thought she was the coolest before. You're a Dane, because unfortunately it's only in Danish. Please go and pick this book up. Also, she's on the back of the book like, isn't this the most stunning book ever? I think so. Then I read Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. That can't be right. McConaughey? Maybe it is. Wild Dark Shore follows this family that live on an island very near Australia. It's not a real island, but it is inspired by an actual island where there are a lot of scientists who are working in order to figure out what kind of plants they would have to save, like in case something happens, like with global warming, and we have to save the earth somehow. And one day a woman is found on the beach, and this family end up taking care of her. It's a dad and his 3 kids, but both sides, so both the kids, the dad and the woman, they're not all telling the truth, or they're only telling certain parts of their story, and we don't really know who we can trust either, and we don't know why people are lying. It's kind of a crime or like a suspense novel, but with a big focus on biodiversity, global warming in general. I'm not gonna say much more because that would spoil it. I think the entire idea of the story is that you have to like be wondering what is happening, what is this actually about? And I think she did an amazing job with that. I also loved the way the atmosphere was described. Everything was described was just stunning. And it actually made me Google the island that it was inspired by afterwards, because I really wanted to see what it looked like in real life. And yeah, that was beautiful. It was almost like nature was its own character, and I really liked that. So that's definitely going to be a recommend. Then I read Perfume by Patrick Süskind. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but this is a classic. It's going to be the weirdest thing to explain this book, but it's about a guy who is born without a scent, like he doesn't smell. His sense of smell is like superhuman. He can smell everything. He can smell like the notes in everything. And this is without it being a spoiler, but he finds out that like the most beautiful smell is that of a beautiful virgin girl. So he kind of sets out to create the most perfect perfume, and that leads you on a wild journey. It's really bizarre. It's also a little comical. It's just like the entire idea of this book is so beyond me that I couldn't help but be surprised at every turn. I never saw anything coming. It's a very short book. It's a classic. If you like weird books, definitely read this one. I think it's a classic for a reason. I recommend it. I listened to 2 more audiobooks. One was When the Night Comes Falling by Howard Bloom, and the other one was Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. So the first one is about the Idaho student murders, and I actually didn't know anything about this case before I listened to it, but I've seen a lot of reviews on Goodreads where they mention how it's a little strange that this book was released before the case was solved, which I agree with. And I actually had a hard time following the storyline. There was a lot of focus on people around the case that I had a hard time keeping track of them in my mind. It might have been because it was an audiobook, but I don't know if I would recommend this. Like, for sure, be aware of trigger warnings. And just from what I've seen online, people say that there are other books that do it better. So take that with a grain of salt. The other one, the Rock, Paper, Scissors, was a thriller, which I unfortunately did not like. It was incredibly long and so unrealistic. Follow a couple who are struggling in their marriage. They are staying at this isolated cottage in Scotland during a snowstorm, and weird things start to happen in this house. And we also have these letters from the wife throughout the book. I expected, since it was a thriller, that it would have me on the edge of my seat and I would be dying to like keep listening to it, but I felt like it was way too long and it was not really creepy enough, which is a crazy thing for me to say. I just felt like it wasn't eerie enough. Plot twists were a little insane. Like, some of them I saw coming, others were just like way too unbelievable. When the book ended, I was just like, was that it? Like, have I missed a few chapters? Is there a second book? Like, what? I don't know. I was just not impressed. I would unfortunately not recommend this. Then I read The Book Witch by Meg Shaffer. I've read all other books by this author. I think there are only 3 in total now, but I've loved all of them. I gave the other 2 5 stars. I think this is maybe a 4-star, but it was still really, really good. So we follow Rainey, who's a book witch, and that means it's her job to go into books and save the main characters from like villains or other people who would like jump into the book and try to mess it up or try to make the books disappear by like making sure that the story doesn't happen. And she just can't stay in the book, but she can go in there and like kind of help the main characters move the story in the right direction. And then her own grandfather disappears, and with the help of her favorite book character and like her book crush, she sets out to find him. And it's kind of written as a fairy tale, and it's just so cozy. This is the kind of cozy fantasy that I really enjoy. And I always feel like Meg Shaffer makes such beautiful points in her books, and there's so many good morals in the stories too. Really enjoyed it. So if you like cozy books, if you're a book lover especially, highly recommend picking this one up. Then I read The Children by Melissa Albert. I have read a few other books by this author that I really loved. I also really like this one. This is kind of a dark fairy tale, and it's her first adult fiction book. Follow our main character Genevieve, whose mom was a children's author, and she wrote these best-selling books about basically her and her brother. And now she's estranged from her brother and they haven't spoken for years. She's releasing a memoir about their life, but she's not really actually telling what their childhood was like, because a lot of weird things happened in the house where they grew up and with their parents and everything. And she's really scared that her brother's gonna come out and say that she's lying in her memoir and that she has to face some truths. So that's kind of what the book is about. We are going back and forth in present tense New York and also in the past when they were living in this farmhouse in Vermont. So there's again this kind of suspense throughout the entire book. I never really knew what was going to happen, but you just know that there's going to be a point in the book where something changes. So you're just kind of waiting for that throughout the entire book. I think maybe because English isn't my first language, there were certain parts that were really hard for me to understand, just because like the language is very purple and it's also very verbose at certain points. So I had to reread parts of it. But I also know and can tell that Melissa Albert writes in a really lyrical and beautiful way. So there were some very, very beautiful passages, but I also had a little trouble sometimes following along, and I did have to reread certain parts. But all in all, I really enjoyed this dark adult fairy tale, and I highly recommend it. And then finally, I kind of went wild with Ali Hazelwood books. So I read Loath to Hate You, which has 3 of her novels in it, like her short stories, and I just finished Chicken Mate, and I also read Love Theoretically. Love Theoretically has my now all-time favorite male love interest in a Hazelwood book. I adored him to pieces. I don't think I actually need to say too much about the books, because if you've read an Ali Hazelwood book, you probably know what the formula of her stories are. So it's a little similar to that. Like there's a focus on women in STEM, of course, and then also on like broody males. But Jack is not really a broody male, and I think that's why I really liked him. In Loath to Love You, we have 3 short stories. Or novellas. We have Under One Roof, Stuck With You, and Below Zero. I'm not going to go into detail about these individually. What I will say is, I think it was Stuck With You had a male love interest who was Danish, which I did not see at all. I'm Danish, if that wasn't obvious from my gorgeous Danish accent. So yeah, I did not see that one coming. That was a very pleasant surprise. Chicken Mate is her first and only YA love story. So it's a closed door book, but I still think it worked really well and had the Hazelwood humor that you might know from her other books too. I will say the main character was a little different actually in this one. She wasn't as quirky, I will say that, which was like a pleasant surprise. I enjoyed all of them. I think actually I would recommend all of them, especially if you've been looking to pick up an Ali Hazelwood book, but you feel like they are a little too open door. I highly recommend picking this one up. It's actually a really good time. And I think what all of her books have in common are that they're just so easy to get into and they're such quick reads. You're just promised a really good time. So yeah, I would recommend all of them. And that wraps up all the books that I read in the past 2 months. I really hope that I managed to do this in a non-boring way and that I've stepped up my editing game so that this video is not 10 million years long. Also because I'm really not good at describing books. I'm just here for the vibes. That will be all. I have so many books that I'm really looking forward to reading here in July. I would love to hear if you have any books on your TBR that you are excited for. And then also like what kind of books do you like reading in summer? For me, summer is always romance time. So that's why there were a lot of them on this list too. But yeah, I hope you're doing really well, and I also hope I'll see you in my next video. Bye!